Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. My name is Lindsay Lear. I'm very happy to welcome you to e-commerce in Latin America, local payments for a global community. This is a webinar hosted by AMI and Frecuencia Online. I am the Senior Director and Leader of the Payments Practice at America's Market Intelligence. And I'm very happy to be joined today by Ana Maria Yumiseva, Director of Frecuencia Online. And I will turn it over to her to give us a few words about Frecuencia.
Thank you, Lindsay. Welcome, everybody. I'm very thankful that you guys gave us some time today to learn a little bit more about e-commerce in Latin America. Hopefully, you guys know a little bit about Frecuencia Latin America. We are a publishing company. We've been publishing on all areas of mobile, specifically mobile commerce payments, mobile entertainment, and we've been around for a while. We focus specifically on the connection between mobile and financial services markets and mobile entertainment. So particularly this conference or this webinar is going to talk about where we are in e-commerce, and Lindsay and my colleagues are going to talk more depth, but I just wanted to let you know a little bit more about Frecuencia Latin America. We also organize events, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit more later on about what we're doing in the next month or so. As far as conference focused on mobile commerce, payments, and money. So welcome, everybody. I want to introduce also Raul Cordero. He's the head of financial institutions from Mercado Pago, Mexico. And I also want to introduce our other distinguished panelist, Gustavo Sambucetti. He's the president of the Argentinian Chamber of Commerce, and he also serves as the subdirector of e-commerce of Walmart Argentina. So each one will introduce themselves for a few minutes. Again, thank you, panelists, Lindsay, and distinguished audience. Raul?
Okay, hello to all the audience. My name is Raúl Cordero. As Ana Maria said, I am the head of financial institutions in Mercado Pago. Mercado Pago is the biggest platform of payments in Latin America. We have presence in the main economies such as Argentina, Brazil, Mexico, Chile, Peru, Colombia, and Venezuela. And I also have an online site that is called Track Business. That is my own blog. So if you have any question about online payments in Mexico, you can consult it and visit this blog.
Well, good morning, everyone. I'm Gustavo Sambucetti. I'm president of Argentinian Chamber of E-Commerce. It's a chamber that gathers over 1,000 companies, internet company. Almost every company that is in the internet ecosystem in Argentina is a member of the chamber. And I'm also the e-commerce head for Walmart Argentina, and founder of Go for E-commerce, which is a consulting firm that focuses on building bridges between technology and decision makers. And thank you for being with us this morning or this afternoon.
Great. Thank you, everyone. We're going to get right into it here. Just a bit of housekeeping. For our audience members, this is meant to be an interactive session. You'll see on your control panel there's an option for you to write in questions. As we're going along, as I'm presenting, please feel free to write in your questions. We will address some of them at the end of the panel. So please stay tuned and participate as much as you can and as much as you'd like. Para todos los que nos acompañan desde la región, todos aquí hablamos español y ningún problema en escribir algo en español, alguna pregunta, y te la contestamos de la mejor manera. We're going to be doing this in English today, but again, for anyone who's listening from Latin America and prefers to speak in Spanish, we're happy to do that as well. So I'm going to dive right into the content today. As I mentioned, I lead the payments practice at America's Market Intelligence, which is a market intelligence and research firm focused on helping companies grow in Latin America. Within the payments practice, we have a razor-sharp focus on e-commerce. I'm based in Silicon Valley in San Francisco, where I'm interfacing with digital merchants and payment companies who really are curious about how to grow in Latin America, how to understand the local landscape, how to enable local payment methods. And so basically the goal of today's presentation is to give you a taste of what that local landscape looks like and to understand the differences between the US market or the European market and what Latin America looks like. So, and to my panelists, as I mentioned, this is going to be an interactive dialogue. I'll be presenting a few slides here, but please jump in with questions and comments as we go along. So, this slide was just going to kick us off. The main point I want to drive home in this webinar today is that the Latin American e-commerce landscape looks very different than it does in the US. And something I want to really caution here is that I'm going to be making a lot of statements about Latin America and making some broad generalizations. And for the most part, some of these bigger themes and trends do hold true for the region as a whole, but it's very important to keep in mind that Latin America is a diverse region with more than 30 markets, and every country has a different payments and banking landscape. So, you know, take these lessons as Latin America as a whole, but also keep in mind that there are huge variations from country to country, and Raul and Gustavo are going to help us understand that a little bit during the panel. So take everything I'm going to say today with a grain of salt. So the first thing I want to establish is the very important fact that, in contrast to the US, where everyone has a credit card and credit card is really the main payment method for e-commerce, only across the region, about 30% of people in Latin America have a credit card. This is going to vary from, upwards of 50% in Chile down to 15 to 20% in Central America, Peru. But electronic payment methods, excuse me, are limited. Population doesn't have necessarily a lot of access to this. So what does that mean for e-commerce merchants? You'll see this breakdown in this graph on the left here of what, on a regional scale, what these payment methods look like. International credit cards, and what I mean when I refer to international is Visa, MasterCard, Amex cards that are enabled for international purchases, okay? As you can see, across the region, these account for only 22% of all e-commerce spend, okay? So that's a small chunk of the pie. The largest chunk of the pie you'll see here is this 42%, this blue circle here, domestic only credit cards. It's really interesting because that doesn't so much exist in the US. In Brazil, in Argentina, in Chile, you have a large chunk of the cards in the market are only available to make local domestic transactions, meaning if you want to buy on an international site, your card is automatically declined. Okay, then you've got what we call cash payment methods, which is nearly 30% of the entire market. Alternative payments or cash payment methods. And then down towards the bottom here in a smaller proportion, bank transfer and debit cards. With the exception of debit cards, with the exception of Mexico, debit cards have largely not even been enabled by issuing banks to make transactions online because of their inferior security features, etc. So just from right off the bat, we can see that the landscape looks really different. On the right here, we have this pie graph, which really kind of summarizes what this all means, what the implications are for international players trying to penetrate the region. Latin America is a big e-commerce market of about $60 billion. Brazil alone represents about 50%, a little less than 50% of the whole region at about $25 billion. Mexico comes in second at about 10 to 12 billion. But as a region, we've got a huge $60 billion market. So this attracts the attention of global players. Very important to understand, however, is that nearly 80% of that market is made using local payment methods only. So if you're an international player trying to penetrate the market with a cross-border Visa, MasterCard acceptance, you're going to forfeit 80% of that addressable market, okay? So that's the kind of baseline I want to establish here. That to truly access Latin American online shoppers, you have to think about how to implement a local payment strategy. Also interesting is the fact that not only are local payment methods not only do they represent the bulk of payments, they're also growing, fast at the same rate or faster than international payment methods. This chart here shows smartphone holders in the region. And at AMI, we use smartphone holders kind of as a proxy for internet users, okay? Because they have a mobile device, they're on social media, they're using messaging apps, they're potential consumers plugged into kind of these global networks. As you can see today in 2017, only 50% of people in Latin America have a smartphone, have a credit card. Only 50% of smartphone holders have a credit card, okay? So automatically 50% of your addressable market doesn't have a way to make a payment. Of that other 50%, 40% of them have only a domestic credit card, meaning if you are a cross-border merchant, you still can't collect payment. So it's a very small percentage of people using a smartphone who can actually engage with your online store. And you'll see that the bottom two categories here among smartphone holders are growing faster. And why is that? Because smartphone adoption is growing faster than credit card adoption. It's a lot easier to buy a smartphone now that prices have come down than it is to get a credit card. Banks have not expanded credit card issuing to a larger chunk of the population. I don't know, Raul and Gustavo, if you have any comments here, how this plays out in your local markets.
Yes, I would like to mention that, for example, in Mexico, we have 30 million credit cards and we have 70 million smartphones. So there is a way, a really important point to consider when you want to contact your consumers, and also if you want, how do you want to develop your online site. And in the case of Mexico, it's really important, the smartphones penetrations, and also the design that you have to consider that it should be mobile first.
Yes, in Argentina, there's something similar. We have more smartphones than people. It's a penetration is it's over 100%. And if you look at the traffic, 55% of the traffic comes from smartphones and growing year over year. And there's a challenge there because conversion rates are smaller. Nearly 10 to 12% of sales are being made in smartphones. So there's a big challenge as an industry in working in the interfaces, in the apps, to facilitate that conversion to rise.
Great, thank you. Thanks everyone for your comments. I am sorry we had a little difficulty with the PowerPoint, but I think it's updated now and you're able to see the slides. Sorry about that. This whole deck will be circulated to whoever wants to have a copy of it. So I appreciate that for your patience. Okay, great. So, Raul and Gustavo mentioned how important, how large smartphone penetration is compared to credit card penetration, which really points to how important local payment methods are, and also making those local payment methods adaptable to the mobile channel, which can be also very challenging. When I talk about local payment methods, what does that even mean? For people at least familiar with the U.S. market, the idea of making a cash payment for e-commerce or a bank transfer is a very foreign concept. So this slide kind of shows what some of these different payment methods are per market. And I'm certainly not going to go over every one, but the point is to show here that, as you can see, there is a huge variety, a huge diversity of payment methods by country. And this is really, a lot of people approach me and say, I want the silver bullet, one turnkey solution for all of Latin America. And very unfortunately, that simply doesn't exist. Just looking at Brazil, we've got, for domestic credit cards, Elo and Hiper, which are two Brazilian-only, very important credit card networks that you can't get outside of Brazil. In Mexico, for cash payments, we see OXXO. Raul mentioned OXXOPay earlier. Probably the leading cash payment provider in Latin America. In Brazil, we've got a similar voucher system here, which I'm going to explain, Boleto Bancário. Every country has their 5 or 6 banks that are most active in e-commerce that enable bank transfers. So we've got a huge diversity, And it's really important for merchants and others to keep in mind, how do people like to pay for things? Because if your e-commerce store doesn't look familiar, if it doesn't look native, if it doesn't look culturally relevant to your consumer, they're probably going to go elsewhere. So just to kind of visualize what that diversity looks like.
If I can make a comment here, or rather, or just rather a comment or a question. Still, the majority of people in Latin America don't have credit cards. So is cash still king? What do you think, Raul or Gustavo?
I think that on top of that, most Visa, MasterCards that are the ones that have the bigger penetration are not international. They are addressed for, there are many Visa, MasterCards that cannot be used outside the country. So that is something that even with international brands, they have limitations regarding the reach for the payment.
Well, in the case of Mexico, cash is really important. As Lindsay mentioned, OXXO, it's a correspondent bank, and it has 15 points of payment, or 15,000 branches. And if you sum the total of bank branches in Mexico, there are less than the OXXO branches had. So in the case of Mexico, to accept payments with cash, you should consider OXXO as an important payment processor.
Yeah, as we saw, I just wanted to, as we saw generally, overall, cash makes up about 30% of all e-commerce payments in the region. That varies. In Mexico and Brazil, it's about 25 to 30%. In Chile, it's very small. You've got a high banked population, and cash payments really haven't been spread out as much. How about in Argentina, Gustavo?
In Argentina, Rapipago and Pago Fácil allow to do that, but when we look at the years before, it's decreasing. It's less than 5% at the moment. Those are branches or chains of branches where you can pay cash. But what is really growing is the store pickup. And some of the big players in the e-commerce markets are retailers with a lot of branches, with many branches, and they are, in our case, in Walmart, we are using our branches and our stores to deliver the orders. And in our case, and in many cases, it goes up to 70% of our total orders are being delivered at the stores. And when you deliver at the store, you give the customer the chance to pay online, to pay credit card. At the moment they take the order, or even to pay cash. But in most cases, they prefer to pay with credit card or debit card, either online or in store.
Yeah, I think that highlights a really important theme that holds weight across Latin America. Latin Americans are very avid internet users, very connected to social media, love being online, but the transaction is still sometimes separated. So people don't always feel comfortable making a transaction online. They don't want to put their credit card information, and they feel much more comfortable going to making the order online, but then going to the store, making sure that they can see and touch the product and hand over cash or make a card payment. I think that's kind of still the challenge and something merchants really need to keep in mind is that electronic payments are still, there is a large market for it, but there is also a large market that is still offline, even though the order might be online and the customer is online.
There's a little bit of a cultural issue there as well. I believe people still have a little bit of distrust, and particularly in Latin America, the fact that there's the unbanked population is so big. I always wonder how that is that challenge is going to be surpassed, because I think there's a little bit of a cultural resistance even. I don't know what you guys think, but I see a lot of it still, a lot of people that don't have trust in credit cards and that.
No, I'm glad you mentioned that. This slide kind of talks about who is using local payment methods and why. And there's kind of a perception that, cash payment methods are only going to be for people who don't have a credit card. But that's really not true. The use of local payment methods and cash payment methods really spans the socioeconomic spectrum. So we have kind of, as we see here, upper middle class folks who use their card all the time in stores, but are afraid to put that information online, especially if it's not a merchant that's really well reputed or that they don't trust. So they may choose to use a cash payment method or pick it up in the store or something like that. Then you've got a more solid folks who are solidly in the middle class. They're not affluent. They don't have affluent cards, but they might have a retailer card or a starter credit card. Very oftentimes women who may or may not be working. And what happens on these cards is that the credit limit is very low. In the US, you're 18 years old, you apply for your first credit card, you get a $5,000 credit limit. That doesn't happen, in Latin America. Credit limits tend to be around average about $500, maximum going up to $5,000 if you're the super black premium card holder. So you may be using your card and all of a sudden you want to make a purchase online and you don't have the credit limit. So you're going to have to use some sort of other payment method. You've also got university students, millennials, young people who are solidly from middle class families and who have resources but just don't yet qualify for a credit card. And then you've got this emerging middle class, people who have grown up and operate in an informal economy using cash their whole life. And they may not have access to banking, or they just simply may not feel comfortable with it because cash is accepted everywhere. They've always used it, and it's kind of just a habit and cultural theme. So we've got the use of local and cash and alternative payment methods in every kind of demographic group, and merchants need to learn how to accommodate each one depending on their needs.
There's another dimension, Lindsay, that is the formal versus informal economy, and that's not only happens in the low classes. Unfortunately, in Latin America, in middle and even in very high levels, there's a part of the economy that it's not declared or in the formal system. So that also counts at the moment of using credit cards.
Absolutely, yep. So one other, kind of switching gears here, one additional component that is exceedingly important to local payments in Latin America is what we call the notion of installments. They have different names depending on the country. Cuotas in Argentina, meses sin intereses in Mexico. And this kind of is very baffling to people who don't understand how this works in Latin America. Interest-free installments is something that has become a cornerstone of the Latin American shopping experience in many countries. First, in the physical world. What this means is merchants offer consumers payment plans at the point of sale when they're making a purchase. Up to 24 months with no interest. You can buy your airline ticket or your TV, really making these very expensive goods affordable to people for the first time. Now, of course, they're not actually free. The financial cost is built into the final cost of the product, but it's in most cases advertised to the consumer as free financing. And so folks have become very used to this, and they've come to expect it. For payments as low as goods for $30. You go to Colombia, you go to McDonald's, you go to Starbucks, you go to a bar, you go to do your grocery shopping, and they'll ask you, how many payments do you want to make this in? I remember in Argentina, actually, when I was in Buenos Aires doing my grocery shopping for the first time, and someone asked me how many payments did I want to buy my groceries in, and I was very confused and just said one. But it's a very common for people to have access to this. And so you as a merchant, and there'll probably be questions about this. This can be confusing. It's the acquiring bank makes this available, charges commissions to the merchants. The issuing bank is the one who takes on the risk. and the consumer really benefits. So this has now transferred over to e-commerce, and we've seen astounding numbers. In Brazil, almost 60% of all e-commerce purchases are made using an installment plan. In Argentina, Gustavo can probably correct me, but I've seen statistics of that being upwards of about 70%. Raul, how do you see this in Mexico?
It's really similar, and we just had 2 weeks ago the hot sale here in Mexico, only online merchants, and the main communication and the main marketing strategy was offering installments. In the case of Mexico, there are more popular from 3, 6, 9, 12, or 18 payments. And I think, and what I have seen is that it's around 30–40% of the sales that goes through this marketing or this kind of selling, and this is really popular. There is also at the end of the year another important date. It's kind of our local Friday, Black Friday, that it's called El Buen Fin, and it's the same. The main offer are installments, and also you can see in travel industry, installments are really relevant.
I'm
going to take a question from the audience here. You know, what price amount, at what ticket is it common to start offering installments? Is it used for cheaper products or only expensive goods? What do you guys see in Mexico and Argentina?
In the case of Mexico, the acquire bank is the first that defines what is the minimum volume. For example, in the case of installments of 3 payments, the minimum is 300 pesos. That it's around $20. And it's the same for 6 payments. It's 600 pesos. And what I have seen is that it depends on the payment. If, for example, for 12 payments, I think 1,000 pesos, that it's around 50 US dollars.
Okay. So you do see installments used on lower ticket, you know, down to $20.
Yes, I have seen some examples where you go to the market and you can pay, as you say, your groceries or your meal in 3 or 6 payments. But it's not.
If I can make a comment here, in Ecuador, for example, they use Diners card, and I don't know if it's popular outside of Ecuador, frankly. I think Colombia uses it too, I'm not sure, but in Ecuador, everybody has a Diners card, and everybody has it because you can use parcelamiento for everything. And if you go out to dinner, to the movies, even if you do actually have the cash or the funds in the way to pay at once, people just don't do it. So it's very culturally penetrated, and it's every shop. The first thing they ask if your waitress brings the check is how many parcelamientos.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and I think it's important for international merchants to understand that if you're not able to offer installments, your product very well may be too expensive for your consumers, and they're going to go with a competitor. So to be competitive in the marketplace in Argentina, in Brazil, in Mexico, in Colombia, this is something very important. And you can only offer installments by plugging in to the local payment landscape, the local acquirers.
And if I can say something interesting, as you mentioned, I live in Miami, but there's this payment method, Square. Square started offering now parcelamientos.
In Miami.
Very easy to, just you use Square, and you want to sell things, and immediately you can offer your clients how many payments do you want to break, and that's very innovative. I think they copied that from Latin America, because you can do it very easy, and as you know, in the U.S. it's hard to get credit.
Well, Miami is the right market for that.
Yes, good point. That's a very good point. Yeah. Okay.
Great. So I'm going
One
to
comment.
Gustavo, go for it.
Yeah, sorry. One comment on installments, because it was very important in Argentina until February this year. You could buy almost anything in 12 installments without interest. And even for the World Cup, there were up to 50 or 48 installments. So it was funny because you finished your last installment when the next World Cup was starting. So that was
Yeah, I mean, when you think about how this works out practically, imagine you go into you basically have a monthly payment for the World Cup every 4 years, and you're on a payment plan constantly. Or you want to buy the newest iPhone, you walk in, you pay $50, and you walk out with an iPhone. And people have to manage these things over over the months, but installments have really enabled Latin Americans to access products that they wouldn't have access to otherwise. And so, there's a lot of controversy also, with over indebtedness and
Yes,
but in many ways, it's really helped the region to develop.
I mean, interest rates in Latin America are not cheap, so that's something to think about too.
No, and what the government did this year was they forbid the retailers to say without interest, because what happened is that 50% of the people that bought in one payment or cash were financing the cost of the installments. So that generated a download in prices. Prices went down a little bit. Nevertheless, the big ticket items sales went down as well.
Mm-hmm.
Wow,
interesting. Yeah, I mean, if you're going to pay up front, you might as well pay in installments because it's going to cost you the same either way.
Yeah.
Great. Oh, that's fascinating. So I want to go back here to this kind of section before we get into the panel, just looking at a couple of examples of innovation from the region and how local banks, merchants, and payment processors are innovating and being creative to accommodate the Latin American consumer. And I want to really walk the audience through what a cash payment looks like in Latin America. Many of you all listening will be familiar with this, but many of you might be scratching your heads. How do you pay e-commerce in cash? So as I mentioned, you've got Boleto in Brazil, you've got Oxxo in Mexico, you've got Rapipago in Argentina. These are networks. And basically, if I'm in Mexico and I want to go to Palacios, a big department store in Mexico, and make a purchase, at checkout, I select Oxxo. Instead of Visa or MasterCard, you select Oxxo. And the platform generates a voucher with a barcode, which you print out. You then have a window, 48, 72 hours of time. And before that time period ends, you have to go to an Oxxo store. Oxxo is a convenience store very similar to 7-Eleven, the largest in Mexico. You go to this store, you pick up your eggs and your milk, and you go to the cashier who scans the barcode, and you pay them in cash. And at that moment, the merchant is alerted that the payment has been made. So this may seem, if you're not used to this concept, it may seem inefficient or inconvenient or a hassle, but it is, again, makes up 30% of all e-commerce sales. In Brazil, the cash payment method Boleto is used for many types of payments, not just in e-commerce. So you use it to pay your rent, to pay your kids' school tuition, to pay your utilities. People are very used to it. And so this type of innovation has really empowered and enabled people to access online channels. And I want to go to just kind of a couple of examples here of local merchants who have made this happen. LAN Chile, the largest airline in Latin America, has really been a leader in enabling cash payments. In Peru, where only 20% of people have credit cards, LAN recognized that they had a completely sort of untapped market. And this was already, 10 years ago when e-commerce was kind of just getting started in the region. And LAN recognized that their customers don't have credit cards. So they independently built out their own payment system where people could buy on their website and make payments in grocery stores. And you'll see this is a screenshot of the LAN checkout flow. And these bottom two options here are supermarkets. Wong and Plaza Vea are supermarkets. So you, again, generate a barcode, you go to the supermarket and make the payment. Now, LAN, or what is now LATAM Airlines, is recognized in Peru by every player as the leader and the pioneer in e-commerce. And they alone account for about 10% of the total e-commerce market. And many have followed in their footsteps, and this is true across the region. One other really interesting example I want to give is kind of a new and growing startup in Chile called Pago46. They're endeavoring to be the Uber of cash payment collection, and this is a model I haven't seen anywhere else in the region. If you're a customer buying online, you want to pay in cash, you select Pago46 at checkout, and that sends out an alert to the nearest agent. So you see here, agent might be walking around the city or on their bike, kind of like Uber drivers, and you get an alert, someone wants to pay you in cash. And then you connect with the buyer, you decide on a meeting point, or you go directly to their house and you collect the payment. So it makes the payment a lot more convenient for the buyer. It makes it faster. And it's really oriented towards kind of millennials and very avid smartphone users. So, and this is notable that this is happening in Chile, which has the highest banked rates and highest credit card penetration in the region. So if there's a market for this kind of thing in Chile, imagine, you know, this type of technology and startup innovation can scale very quickly throughout the rest of the region. Great.
Did we lose Gustavo?
I think we might have. Gustavo, are you there? Can you still hear us?
Yeah, I can.
He's there.
Yeah,
oh, okay, great.
I turned the camera off because there was some bandwidth
Some interference.
problem.
Okay, no problem. Well, I want to get to our panel. There's a couple more slides here, but kind of just some takeaways here is that, you know, a cross-border payment strategy is really only going to scratch the surface of the market in Latin America. If you're a serious global merchant or payment processor who wants to get involved in Latin America, you have to have a deeper, in-depth knowledge of what the mix of payment methods are in each market and what the local preferences and behaviors are. You know, to accept payments locally often means you have to have a local entity, which is a whole nother discussion and it comes with a whole set of challenges. There are lots of models, however, and lots of providers that enable you to accept local payments without ever stepping foot in the local market. I'm happy to talk about that with anyone who's interested. I don't want to get into in detail. But just some concluding thoughts here. Really what I like to drive home is that if in Latin America, if you are not accepting local payments, you are forfeiting $46 billion in addressable market. Okay, if you're plugging into local payment methods, all of a sudden your addressable market has expanded exponentially. So I'll leave that kind of those final thoughts with the audience, and now I'm going to turn it over to Ana Maria to really engage Gustavo and Raul to get some real local expertise, Argentina and Mexico, and I'll continue to, you know, reminder to please send in your questions and we'll address them as we continue through the panel.
Thank you, Lindsay. Great, fantastic information. I love those case studies. Okay, so I thought that we used the last 10 or 15 minutes of the webinar to have a candid discussion with Raul and Gustavo and our audience about where the opportunities are and how do we see the future of electronic commerce in Latin America. So when Lindsay was talking about all these payment methods, yes, it is crucial to have a local payment method if you want to be a player in Latin America. But how do you see the role of international players in your local markets? For example, the ones that we already know, PayPal, Amazon, you know, there's so many. Lindsay is in San Francisco, but I know of several initiatives, fintech initiatives in particular, that are already hitting very strong in the region. For example, there's one from Remitly that was already operating in 4 or 5 countries in Latam with pretty much the same concept. So I was curious to know how your markets are reacting to this very strong international forces. What do you think, Raul? What is the perception, and do these big solutions are facing a lot of forces locally that might not let them penetrate the market very rapidly, cultural forces as well, but they're also gaining ground fast. So what's up with that? What are your thoughts?
Well, in the case of Mexico, we see really positive the new competitors that we have here. You know, you mentioned Amazon, you mentioned AliExpress, and we as Mercado Pago, with the knowledge of Latin American market, we are really prepared. I mean, we have more than 70 payment methods across the region. And talking about Mexico, we are focused on credit card, on debit card, and we have developed a really big network of cash payments that also Lindsay mentioned that that's really important for this region. We have more than 20,000 points of sales, including OXXO, 7-Eleven, bank branches, and this kind of offer to the payers, I think, is one of the differentiators from the international competitors. And also, it's a good offer for those who want to process payments locally to integrate Mercado Pago.
So what do you think, Gustavo?
Well, in the case of Argentina, we come from a process of a very closed market. It was very regulated, and we had a change, administration changed last year, and now we're starting, well, companies are starting to innovate because it was very well concentrated in Visa and MasterCard. And the good thing about this new area is that there's some players like Mercado Pago as well that took the initiative, and they are the really alternative for credit cards. As a matter of fact, they took part of the business that in other countries is going to cash, and Mercado Pago managed to be more relevant and more trustable than banks. So there are a lot of people that don't use credit cards or big banks relationships, don't have relationships with banks, but they have with Mercado Pago through Mercado Libre. And Mercado Libre in Argentina has 2 million sellers, and something like, you can correct me, Raul, but 7 million buyers, active buyers. And so they are the vehicle to massify e-commerce and payments. So they kind of replace the cash and build a bridge between non-banked people and e-commerce.
I also would like to mention something else. We discussed that it's very important to have different payment methods, but also it's really important to understand the fraud rate that is in the region. And also the local players, the local processors has fraud prevention tools that has all the knowledge of the consumers in Latin America. So I think that it is also an important thing that you should consider when you process local payments.
Raul, thank you for mentioning that. I'm going to jump in with a question from the audience. You know, fraud is definitely a concern, and we haven't talked too much about it. So how does fraud in Latin America compare to global markets, you know, fraud rates, and how are local merchants coping?
Okay. For example, what I have seen is that, taking US as an example, the fraud rate is 0.6%, and in Mexico is 1.9%. So it's really high. It's really different from Europe and from US. And in the case of Mercado Pago, we have a really strong fraud prevention tool with AI, machine learning, and we have all the history and all the knowledge from the different markets, and we are constantly working to develop new tools and changing the rules because it is a really important point for e-commerce in Latin America.
Gustavo, what about Argentina? Is Gustavo frozen?
Yeah.
There you are.
Okay. Well, in the case of Argentina, we don't have a different index. That it's very similar to the physical market. I always say that it's more dangerous in Argentina, for example, when you go to a restaurant to pay the bill, you give the credit card and your ID to the waitress, and you lose sight of both of them for 5 to 10 minutes. I always say that that's very it's 10 or 100 times more dangerous than putting your credit card online. That technology has evolved a lot to detect fraudulent transaction. So fortunately, we don't have an issue there. It's nearly 1%. And we have local players. Mercado Pago is one that helps, especially small or middle business, to prevent it. So there's not an issue at the moment.
I think that highlights a really good point, is that it's important to differentiate between the risk of fraud and the perception of fraud, right? I've heard from a lot of merchants in Latin America who they have a call center as a way to accept payments. So you could buy online with your credit card, or you can call the call center and make the payment. And people are much more comfortable talking to a human and giving their credit card data to a stranger who you've never seen and have no idea who they are or where they are located in the world. But people feel more comfortable with that. It's more culturally acceptable than putting your data out in there into the universe of e-commerce. And so I think there's a lot of education still needed. It's true in the U.S. as well. About what the risk is and where their data is safe.
Correct. On the other hand, you have to evaluate what's the benefit cost equation, because setting up a call center to do something that machines can do, it's probably more costful than assuming 10% more of fraud.
So how would you describe the segment that uses most or that could potentially trigger the massification of local payments, for example? Would you say that millennials are being more trusted when they make electronic purchases? Like, for example, I'm thinking that I think it's in Brazil. A lot of millennials use mobile games, for example, or buy games that are really cheap, and so they use any type of electronic payment method they can use, whether it's prepaid, postpaid, or whatever, unbanked, or anything. So what is your experience as far as the massification of payments in your respective countries?
Well, let me tell you something. For example, here in Mexico, we launched 2 years ago a debit card for Mercado Pago. And the first approach was to the unbanking persons. But what we see is that people that already has a credit or debit card are using this card just to limitate the fraud that they have. And also what we see is that millennials are buying this debit card because with this debit card they can buy, as you mentioned, some lives in Xbox or uniforms in FIFA and some online games. And I see that millennials are more used to pay with electronic with credit cards or debit cards in this case, and using the mobile. This is the combination, the credit card or debit card with the mobile. And it's more common with this segment of population.
Yeah, and on top of that, in Argentina, it's very similar. And on top of that, the credit card holders are not the heavy users of internet. If we look at the e-commerce shoppers profile, 57% in Argentina are millennials. And not all millennials have credit cards, and if they have credit cards, they probably have a credit limit, low credit limit. Mm-hmm. And on the other hand, people over 50, let's say, are the ones that have the credit cards, but not the ones who buy online. So I think that there's going to be a transition.
There's kind of a mismatch there,
yeah. It will correct with the years, right?
Right.
Well, it's
when we
go ahead. All right. So I think we lost Gustavo momentarily. So okay, so now we mentioned the mobile channel. I wanted to go a little bit more in depth about mobile. So in Latin America, the penetration of mobile is not only reaching 100%, but even surpassing 100%. So my question was, how do you see the role of mobile in electronic commerce? How is mobile being utilized there? And in which ways would some merchants want to use tools, mobile tools, for example, digital wallets or tokenization to massify the use of electronic commerce? What do you think, Raul?
Well, in Mexico, and as I mentioned before, we have 70 million smartphones, almost twice than credit cards. And also an important thing is that local banks are starting to work on on digital wallets. So you can pay with your digital credit card using the wallet. And also what I see is that the international brands such as Visa and MasterCard are developing the wallet. In Mercado Pago, we also have a wallet, and we have really focused on this development of the wallet. And it's important also considering that 40% of the population here in Mexico is between 18 and 40 years. So it's if
40%.
40%.
Wow.
So it's a combination. If you have these millennials with the mobile and the developing of the wallets, it's really relevant to the merchants and also for the payments processors as us to have an option to pay with wallets.
Yeah, there are actually studies that show that are analyzing this kind of demographic shift in Mexico and discussing the fact that actually mobile has incredible potential in Mexico because you've got this 40% of the population is in this perfect age range to be using the mobile channel. And at the same time, you've got smartphone penetration finally reaching levels, where, the majority of middle-class people have them. So Mexico is actually an incredible market for mobile. I think the challenge is getting people to transact on the mobile channel, which is what these digital wallets are about, and merchants and payment companies are trying to figure that out.
Gustavo, what about you? I'm curious to know also. I would assume that there's a similar case in Argentina, but I know that Argentinians don't have many iPhones, right? I mean, they're still not being sold there. Am I correct with that?
Yeah, actually, we don't have many iPhones because of import restriction. It just opened you can officially buy an iPhone in Argentina from last month. Nevertheless, there are like 8 to 10% of total cell phones are iPhones because you cannot avoid what is unavoidable, and people could buy it anyway from traveling or buying in the informal market. But nevertheless, the mobile is very developed. We say that mobile is to e-commerce what e-commerce was to physical commerce. It's really, I think it's a big challenge. And regarding payments, my thought, my belief is that people that is not in the banking system today will go directly to the mobile payment system. It's like what Africa did with mobile. They went from not having telephone to have mobile, and use mobile other than or a lot more than desktop. I think that the same thing will happen in Latin America. The segment that was not being taken care by banks will be taken care by fintech.
Great.
Very interesting.
Okay,
So,
guys. Well, unfortunately we're coming up on our hour mark, and I do want to respect everyone's time. There were a couple of audience questions that we did not get to, but we will respond to over email. So we'll make sure everyone kind of gets some insights there. Just some final thoughts. Some really interesting questions. Just want to take a moment to share some additional resources for our audience. If anyone is looking for more information, wants to talk more about these issues, Ana, I think, has an exciting event coming up.
yes, very briefly, I want to invite everybody to join this conversation that we're having a little bit more in depth in our conference into banking and fintech Latin America, which we're doing for the second time in Silicon Valley, July 18th to the 20th. Lindsay would be one of the speakers. Hopefully, Raul and Gustavo will also be there. It's the second time. It's a very interesting event. If you want to learn more about the ecosystem in fintech in Latin America and where the ecosystem is going and how it's being shaped and how to adapt it to our own necessities in Latin America, it's going to be taught by some very interesting fintechs, and many banks, financial institutions from Latin America are going to be attending as well. I can send you more information, but for those of you who were in the webinar today, there's a discount of $300 in the registration, and the code is WEB300 if you want to take advantage of that. But just want to urge you to attend. It's something very different. We do a tour of Silicon Valley companies on the first day, and the second and the third day are a little more academic. So if you want to meet yours truly, talk to Lindsay and many other very interesting speakers and world figures in fintech and banking, please come and join us. So. Again, continue to read us. Thank you, everybody, for taking the time of your schedule to be here. And as Lindsay say, we're here for any questions. I will start sending you M2Commerce Latam news if you don't receive it yet. And for everybody, have a very nice day and a very nice week. Thank you, Lindsay. Thank you, Raul, and thank you, Gustavo.
Thank you so much, Ana Maria. We've got a couple of more resources here if anyone is interested. AMI publishes white papers, presentations, and articles on a consistent basis, so please check out our website. We've got some links to our most popular resources. And here is all of our contact information. Please feel free to reach out to any of us with questions or additional comments. We are available to speak with you. Again, as Ana Maria said, thank you so much for joining us today. The deck will be, this recording will be available to everyone, and if you would like a copy of the deck, please reach out to me directly via email. I'm more than happy to share it. So again, thank you, Gustavo and Raul, for joining us today. Thank you, Ana Maria. Thank you for everyone for being here, and we hope to speak to all of you soon.
Have a nice afternoon.
Bye. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.